Agenda.
How's everybody doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
We're doing okay. COVID has hit.
COVID?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, Teresa,
Okay, we're good.
we're good to go.
All right, you want to do roll call?
Yes, I will. Jamie Melky, Gail Brown,
Here,
and Teresa Johnson.
Here.
We also have Dana Mulder via Zoom. She can participate but cannot vote, but we do have a quorum.
All right, so let's move straight to approval of our meeting minutes from August 18th. Any comments on the minutes?
No.
No? Dana?
Nope.
No? So
I would make a motion to approve. And I'll second.
second, thank you. Meeting minutes have been approved.
Favor.
Yes.
Yeah,
Pardon?
there's a motion in a second. You just got to make it official by saying all in favor.
Oh, sorry, all, yeah.
We're really sticklers. All right.
All right, board communications. Do we have any new items that we want to discuss? I don't have anything. Victor, no. Anna, okay. So let's move on to public comment. Any comments not related to items that are on the agenda? We don't have anyone else on Zoom besides Dana?
And looks like it only is Dana.
Okay. All right, so we will move on to old business. The only thing we have on our agenda for old business is the street tree plan corridor. And this month we were looking at below the Bluff West and Glen Drive. So did anyone notice any holes in those areas where we might want to put some trees on the street? I felt like most of those areas were pretty well covered.
It's pretty covered. There is like an empty lot on the corner of Third and Washington, maybe,
Okay.
that has like nothing.
Third in Washington. So right here.
Yeah, there's like nothing all along there. And then also like where the new houses are going up on Second, but obviously that would be once they're built and.
Right.
I noticed the
Technically,
same thing where the cottage company houses are, both on Third and on Second. And then Traverse Street, there's a stretch where there aren't trees.
From Second to Third, I noticed that. as
And then
well.
also between Hankey and Maine. Hankey is the one that goes down to the beach. Who even knew there was a Hankey Street in Harbor Springs?
okay, so between the Little Harbor Club and their parking lot that they have. So
Yes.
this, if you look at this map, Dana, can you see the map?
Yep,
that is on the
yep.
screen?
Yep.
So this is kind of unique because this parking lot right here is the Little Harbor Clubs. It's not the cities. So it's really kind of impossible to put trees in right here that would block their parking. But there is this side, and I know they've come to the planning commission. I think they want to come again to kind of do some rearrange. One time they had asked us about, an exchange of property, potentially, or with the right of way to change this parking lot. And on this side to change things up. So I don't know what they're gonna do there in the future, but this is, as Dan said, it is kind of void of trees, but it's a little convoluted, that area.
Actually, I was talking about Traverse Street between
Oh, I thought you
Hankey.
said it. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
between Hankey and Maine.
So right here,
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about Hankey Street. because that's also voided trees.
Yeah. And boy, they are going at it hard on the demo at Little Harbor Club. I went by there today and they're really going for it.
Yeah, there are hardly any trees, if any, on the street side.
Yeah.
And I know we had talked about potentially when someone took out trees down here to move them to across. But then we set up here, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I got so far, Jamie, you said around Third Street and Washington,
Yes,
and then we have Traverse Street, essentially much of Traverse Street between, I would say Hankey and probably all the way up to Second.
and then Traverse Street from Second to Third on the other side.
Right here.
Yeah. And then all around where the cottage company houses are being built.
And that little Washington Street, there's just a little section of it that runs between what is it, 3rd and 4th, maybe?
Right here?
Yeah.
Yep. Then I guess if you go around the corner, 3rd Street there too. That corner at 3rd and Washington, or is that what you were saying, Jamie?
Yeah, that
that's-
whole corner, that
Yeah, that-
empty lot just has that one tree in the smack middle of it.
so essentially Third Street, much of it from Washington to Traverse Street, right here.
It does, from
And
whatever, like where that big tree is where you can't see the road, like that. Everything beyond that is pretty fine between Traverse, but it's just that,
Right here,
yeah, that whole spot.
it's right up here too. Oh,
Fourth Street on both sides of the road, really, there's a lot of spots that might benefit. And there's so many trees, I would say west of Washington, that maybe doesn't need to be worried about, but
Yeah, so Fourth Street between Washington and.
Church, yeah.
And, you know, we do get, and I don't know if this would be a solution, we do get a lot of complaints from the Fourth Street residents about speeding on this road, obviously because it's a downhill. And I don't know if adding more trees would make it feel tighter, but to control speed at all, but.
Right, thanks.
I don't
That's what
think
the
it will.
studies say.
I mean, they go so fast
It's
down
good
the
to have.
hill where it's so narrow already,
Yeah,
that I don't know that it would
That's
slow it
true.
down.
Here's something that I would like to discuss, if not today, then, you know, before we make our recommendations is, for example, on 4th Street, I think there's wires on the north side. So that would indicate using smaller trees, maybe like what we used up at Bay Bluffs. And so I would like to discuss if we do that, then I feel like we should do that scale of tree on both sides. So it has the feeling of a corridor, not like we're doing something completely different on the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So even if there's no trees on the other side, we should repeat what's been done on the side with trees.
any other thoughts on this?
No, do we want to assign priority to some of these areas?
Oh, yeah, we basically, essentially, we have Traverse Street, Fourth Street, and then this Washington Third Street section.
I would say the only thing I would say is a higher priority would be Traverse.
I would agree.
Everything else, there's so much construction and stuff, it's
Happening.
Still
Yeah,
changing.
Yeah,
I would
So
say
I would-
maybe Fourth Street as well, if speed is a problem.
right.
The highest priority is Traverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Fourth,
Yeah, Fourth Street would be medium priority.
and then Washington Third Street section, in Cottage.
Yeah.
And the rest of Glen Drive looked good.
I think so. Yeah,
There's enough trees there.
yeah.
There's plenty of trees. There's
Glen Drive
probably
is
some
pretty
that
well-
if they ever redo the road that they could remove.
Victor, do you happen to have that document that I sent over, or Teresa, about how we're going to keep track of what we've looked at in priorities and what's recommended? It's a table. You know what I'm talking about? Uh-oh. Hello? Hello?
Then
You guys hear me?
No, we're muted.
Hello?
Yep, can you hear us?
Yep.
We had lost connection for a second. I was saying that I don't have that document on this computer. If you have it available, if you can share it on your screen, otherwise we can put it in the agenda in the packet for next meeting and go through
Okay,
that.
so what,
document.
Victor, yeah, well, we could do that. Why don't we do that? So it's just a table that I made up that has
Right.
planning unit, streets, issues, and action items and priority. So we could do it for next time.
Yeah, and I think then we can, how much more do we have left
I
to,
think we just have Main and Bay, like this area.
okay, so downtown.
Yeah,
Downtown east. Cause then that'd be a good time to, once we have all the corridors looked at, then we can look at that document, that table.
Yep.
So,
We still need to do Hoyt and West Bluff if we're gonna do anything there. And I guess that's it.
wait, did we look at Pine Street or are we talking about that we need to look at Pine Street west of West Bluff,
We did look at it. It was under Uptown East.
uptown? East?
Yeah.
So Main Street and Hoyt, basically, and
Let's see,
Bay and Beach.
I have East Bluff,
Yep, right here, East Bluff Drive.
below the bluff east. Wequitansing. That's such a small part. I don't even know if that's worth talking about.
We can still, I mean, we have, like, we go up to the Colonial Inn essentially, so we can
Yep.
drive down Beach Street, Beach Drive.
Then West Bluff. And Hoyt. And then under corridors, we've got Central Business District, which I'm not sure, the trees are the trees there. Main Street, the rest of the way, and then Waterfront, which would be Bay Street and Beach, or well, Bay Street, yeah, I guess Bay Street.
are they planting a tree in that hole across from the Lyric?
Across from one.
No, they don't have to,
Okay, because there's water there now.
yeah, they have till, I think, October, November to,
I just,
no, they're not doing a tree.
Okay, so no more discussion on what we looked at for this week and I mean, this month. And we know what we're looking at next week. Last meeting, we talked about looking at.
Hey, I'm
pictures of
sorry, what are we
some-
looking at next week?
Next month.
Next month?
Next
The
month?
rest of, yeah, the rest of what you had said, which is quite
Okay.
a bit, but
Yeah.
CBD, Hoyt, Maine, Bluff, and Beach Bay.
Okay,
Oh, that's right. Teresa sent pictures. I forgot.
Yeah, I forgot, when you asked about agenda items, we had talked about looking at pictures of elms and tulip trees. I don't know if we have those.
But we can search it up really quick. We had talked about, because we were talking about, so as a reminder, this is.
This is for
trees the
Marina Park.
Yeah, so if we want to
Okay, yep.
transition to that, yeah.
Yeah,
so
We talked
let's
about
look,
trees
let's
to
look at
plant
the
instead of
Princeton
maple.
elm. Princeton elm was one.
That's one example.
This
and
is
we
a
were looking
cultivar.
for something that would complement the maple that's currently there.
Yep. He's actually growing the same type of habitat as a maple. And so it gets kind of a golden fall color. This is actually a cultivar of the old American elm. So it's a little different shape. It's more of like vase shaped. It's moderately fast growing. It's got a very pretty leaf.
You say it is fast growing or not?
Moderately, yep.
Moderately, okay.
True, Ben?
Yeah. almost
I
goes
think
back.
Ben supports this. This is on our right tree, right place list.
What other?
The other one we talked about was the tulip tree, but I think we were leaning more towards the elm.
Well,
Yeah,
elms-
I think Ben was hesitant about tulip tree because it's super fast growing, which makes it weaker wooded. Is that right, Ben? Are you there?
I'm here, yeah, I mean, so. Tulip trees are not native to Michigan, at least not northern Michigan. They've been planted, they grow reasonably. But in the south, they're immense trees. I mean, they're 3.5 feet in diameter and 120 to 150 feet tall, and they're gigantic. And with that, they grow fast, so they don't put a lot of energy into making really strong wood. The elm is really kind of a sinewy, I mean, it's a really tough tree. Right, so it tolerates really bad soils, it's strong in the wind, it grows like a vase, which is nice around roads. It was a great street tree until the introduction of Dutch elm disease in the United States, and Princeton elm is resistant. There's also a Valley Forge and a New Harmony elm, which are also American elms, but they're different cultivars of that Dutch elm disease resistant elm. So you could, if we can't get Princeton, we could get something else maybe, and that might be, it would still have the character of an American elm. We do have a couple of tulip trees planted.
They've done really well too. There's one at the beach and there's one at Shea Park.
And I like to see like tulips in areas that are open, just because there's space where we get big. You know, there's not a lot of structure close by.
I think they might get too big scale wise too, where they would be out of scale with the other trees. I think the elm will get to be about the same size as the maple. I like that Valley Forge. I like the shape of it. I think either of those would be really good. I think another one that would complement, we're saying no new maples, because the other one that would complement that would be different than the sugar maple that's there would be a red maple.
Right, but we didn't want to do maples because we already have so many.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we're gonna try to stick with something that's not a maple. for
Okay.
public
I thought
purpose.
Ben was saying something about, I don't know that they're different. I don't
well,
know.
we have, I mean, maple is a genus, right? So like we have different varieties within that, but we have lots of maple in inventory. We don't have very many sugar maples as street trees. but we have lots of other ones. So like, we do 10, 20, 30 rule, we've exceeded the 20 and the 30. And so we probably should stay away from that. We've had a couple of exceptions, but like, if we keep making exceptions, all we're gonna have is what we've had historically, and then we end up with some of the problems that Petoskey is trying to work out, which is that they have 1 or 2 species that cover 80% of their inventory. That's what we want to avoid if we can, if we have other options.
Yeah, we have other options.
Yes, we do.
A tree is better than no tree, I think.
Yeah.
So
I think so.
what about the, that black gum that we put up by Bay Bluffs?
The one that's dead.
Yeah. but
Not
then,
that
like,
one,
we also-
the other ones.
But we're also seeing some of the other plants struggle there. I mean, like, we've got other variables to isolate. I mean, I don't know that I would plant more.
Can we make sure these do well?
Yeah, I'd like to see what the other ones do, but then we also don't, we only have. How do I say this equitably? We have one group of people that planted all that stuff and it all seems to be struggling. Like, how do we isolate whether or not it's a water issue, a fertilizer issue, a road salt issue? Like, it may not be the tree, it may be other things that we're dealing with, including planting depth, which we've already identified for some of the other things that have been planted.
Well, Victor told me that these arrived looking kind of like that.
Yeah, I mean, they were waking up from dormancy and, yeah, so they weren't loving it, but I mean, the crab apples look rough too, so. And those should not have any problems.
Yeah, well, there's 3, there's many.
Sure.
Depending on what system we're using.
I should put my face.
Oh, the camera?
Oh,
No, it's just so damn in the ear, like, I don't wanna talk away.
No,
from
she can hear you. We have different microphones.
So,
That's the
but,
audience microphone.
yeah, so to answer that question, I think the jury's still out. We'll have to see what happens. I'm not for or against it at this point.
Okay.
I think it's a good thing to try, and then we could try more, but maybe.
I'm remembering another one we discussed, and that was the well, probably we'd use exclamation plane tree.
Like a London plane, London
Yep.
plane or.
Yeah, that's a cultivar that doesn't get quite as big as the parent plant. Has really interesting exfoliating bark. It doesn't have a lot of fall color, sometimes kind of golden. It has a maple looking leaf.
It has nice.
Ooh,
hard
I
brown
just saw
fruit.
the fruit. That would be one thing. Well, I
There's
don't know. We used to love throwing those at each other when we were kids. Can you see the fruit there? Yeah. They're little,
quite messy.
I would say.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't like acorns, then.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We didn't want oak because of acorns, so I think that this might not be a
I
good
mean,
idea.
I'm gonna point out that all broadleaf plants will fruit unless we try to get things that are genetically isolated to males. And that only happens in a few trees. So maples will produce helicopters, elms will produce things that look like fried eggs, little flat seeds in copious amounts.
what about,
Plants
what
try
about
to have
honey,
this.
what about honey locust?
Well, bean pods, right? Like we can get
No,
some.
those
that-
are fruitless. With all the new ones are fruitless.
If we get those cultivars, we can look for no fruit. But. Okay.
So
We
Victor,
also
if you
have
want,
the-
what are some of the cultivars? Oh, skyline locust. Victor, if you want to pull that up,
You have lots of shade masters,
or shade master, yeah, that'd be good.
but we have lots of those in the inventory already.
Locust,
Well, honey locust. So the thornless honey locust is all a clone of a honey locust that doesn't have thorns, and then we have cultivars of those clones.
I don't like that one that you're showing, Victor. That doesn't really look like what they look like, or like we would not select for one that looked like that. There's the leaflets, yeah. Normally they're very nice form with a straight trunk. And they have kind of a nice filtered shade. And then they have no fruit, so that's good.
What is the size compared to the maple that's already there?
About the same. maybe a little smaller. The locust is what all the trees in Petoskey are. Every single one of their street trees is locust. Victor, yeah, if you want to, here, go down to the next row on the left.
This?
Yep. So you can see this is what we would be planting, not one that's kind of natural and wide ranging.
That's what it'll look like when we plant it, we just.
It was day one.
Day one.
Well, the
There's
trunk
the-
isn't suddenly gonna get crooked.
I guess I have a decision to make.
If you
Kind of
go,
crazy.
if you go look at the trees in Petoskey, they don't have those crooked looking ones.
Yeah.
They're mature and they're all nice and straight and
So we have this honey locust that's gonna be similar in size to a maple, no fruit. We have the elm, which might be a little bit bigger. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I mean, so. None of the trees you're gonna see in Petoskey, unless you find a park that has one, is gonna have a mature honey locust. I mean, it's a big tree. Relative size, it will be wider than an elm will be, but elms are gonna reach tall. All these shade trees have the potential to be 60 to 90 feet, but probably not in the lifetime that we're gonna have them in these areas. The honey locust will grow slower. They're gonna be a pretty hardwooded tree. They would be more like the elm and not like the tulip poplar where they're hard to cut, but they're fairly decay resistant. I mean, historically, they were used for fence posts, and split rail fences because they don't decay. You know, we already have honey locusts in inventory, I mean, like many, and so. The idea of spreading this out would be that if we have something that feeds on that doesn't have a natural predator. We would have huge losses very quickly, right? So right now we have one elm in inventory. If we had more elms, we would have a loss of whatever that is, right? Like 3. If we have something where we plant lots of hosts and we end up with lots of honey locusts, then the problem would be that we could lose all of it at the same time. And they do have pest issues. I mean, they seem to generate spider mites and they seem to generate thrips, and there's a couple other sucking pests. They get leaf hoppers pretty readily, but they're not catastrophic pests. They're more like they make them drop those leaflets constantly. So you get these little leaves all over the place for a lot of the summer and they turn different colors. So that can be managed, but I don't know.
okay, let's move on to Japanese Zelkova.
We have 0 of those.
What are they called?
Zelkova?
We actually have one on Main Street, I think.
Or do we?
Yep.
Was this one of the last plantings? Or the?
Zelkova. Yep.
Educate us on that one.
Yep, that
Well, we
also
don't-
is kind of vase shaped and it has a leaf very similar to the elm. And it kind of looks like the elm.
But not related to that, so they wouldn't share pests. We don't have a lot of them in inventory.
Similar in size.
Yeah, so what we've got then is we've got the sugar maple that's there. Those get to be 60 to 75. The Princeton elm is 50 to 70. And the Zelkova is 50 to 80. So those are about the same scale. And I think that's going to be the nicest look for 3 trees in a grouping. Hector, can you see if there's any pictures of fall color? You want to just go back? Yeah.
It's a pretty good.
So what about, yeah, is that the fall color? I'm trying to remember if they're red or not. I was thinking they were not red, but those would be very pretty. Then we'd have some red.
So are we planning 2 trees of the same species? Is that what we're discussing? Or
I think we were gonna do 2 different species,
2
but we
different
could do
species?
2 elms too. We could just do 2 elms and call it a day.
I think we have a lot of choices, so I think we should narrow it down now that we got, so we've talked about honey locust, London plane, Princeton elm, tulip, and Japanese zircon.
Okay, I'd like to X out the locust.
Yes, I would too.
All
I
right.
like the elm and this one.
So
What are we calling this?
Japanese zelkova.
Zelkova?
I'm gonna vote for elm myself.
I think I would be pretty happy with elms.
You would like the elm?
Yeah.
2 elms?
Yeah, I think we have a consensus on 2 elms.
Okay.
I like that they're native.
Right, I do too.
Right, so like post it.
All right, so 2 elms it is.
We
Okay.
got a winner.
Yay.
All right.
Just an update too. Rachel and I are gonna go look at it again. Just to be 100% sure we want 2 trees. And
Okay.
where exactly they would go before we do anything. But yeah,
It'd probably be the springtime anyway,
yep,
right? Okay.
at this point, yeah.
Okay, so we can, anything else for in old business? For anyone? Nope. Okay, we'll move to new business. We have one thing on the agenda, the block tree removal zoning ordinance.
Right, so I'll give some context here. A few residents who live on Third Street. As you can see, this email by Jonathan Wayman, and we had a few other of his neighbors. They submitted this to the planning commission, as a public comment. And the planning commission is gonna, hear it at their planning commission meeting, then decide whether or not to consider it. But really, they're asking for some sort of zoning ordinance that would regulate, the removal or trimming of trees on bluff properties, on private bluff property. Of course, we have a policy on removal of trees on public property, on bluff property, but this would require some sort of ordinance for removal of trees on privately owned bluff property. Part of the rationale they're using is that we already have restrictions on the bluff from a zoning ordinance perspective for as far as building structures. So we have we don't allow structures to be built on the bluff. We don't allow certain excavation to go on the bluff or near the bluff. And so their concerns are basically bluff stability is what they've highlighted here. I've noted that in our tree plan that we approved a few years ago, before any of you were on this board, a couple of the goals were to create, one of them was to create restrictions on the clear cutting of properties as one goal. And the other goal was to require forest management plans before development or redevelopment commences in certain zoning districts or on properties of certain sizes to preserve the integrity of the forest habitat. So while they're not specific to clear cutting or removal of trees on bluff property, these goals do express a need to somewhat regulate tree removal on properties, or at least monitor it. So I guess the question to tree board is, to discuss this request, and if there's any recommendations you would have to the planning commission about, I guess, proposing or supporting or not supporting a policy an ordinance that would regulate how people trim or remove trees on the bluff. And the picture that they showed was, of course, this homeowner, that's bluff property, and she purchased this property below her for the sole intent purpose of removing all the trees on the bluff so she could have a enhanced view. So
So you
I've
can
been here,
see that they've left.
I've talked to Ben a little bit about this, and he can go in more detail. There still is a question about whether or not, removing trees this way is the cause of bluff instability. We talk about wind and water erosion are 2 big factors as well. So not 100% sure that regulating the removal of trees will necessarily prevent instability on the bluff, but that's better for the experts to talk about. So Ben, if you kind of want to give your insight, and then maybe the tree board can talk about it a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think that the letter that was sent is factually correct, right? Like the concern about root structure. In this picture, you see stumps, those roots are still there, so those roots are doing essentially for the argument that there's an increased erosion risk because the trees are gone because of damage to root structures is just not true. Right, those roots are there, they're autonomous, meaning that if I cut the tree today, it's gonna take a long time for that root structure to know that it's dead. And what we have a really good evidence of in 20 years of looking at bluffs and Sea Harbor Springs is that a lot of those plants are gonna resprout from those stems. So I think that there's a real concern. I think that what is being stated as being the reason for that concern is not tied to how trees function or what's going on with this picture. If somebody were to pull those stumps out, like grind the stumps like you would in a yard, if you were planting another tree or putting in a house, then that would be a real issue. But those roots are there. They're doing what they were doing before for holding pieces of soil particulate in place. That hasn't changed. The question is the loss of the canopy and the loss of the foliage changed something in some way? And that's hard because what will happen is that whole hillside's gonna grow a whole bunch of little shrubs and plants and stuff like that. And in some ways, those would be better suited for stopping erosion. If we're worried about long-term carbon sequestration or openings in the forest or creating habitat for invasives, I think that there's a great argument for limiting this because this opens it up. It's a forestry release. We're going to get all sorts of the things we don't like autumn olive, the Adrian honeysuckle, and box elder. But they're all plants, and I don't know.
So I guess just to recap what I'm hearing here is that perhaps for bluff stability, the removal of trees in this manner is not so much of a concern as the concern is more potentially to the loss just of this much canopy or the invitation to invasive species that could cause.
Historically, what we see that areas where we have sliding in the bluff is the one area where we didn't have any tree cutting, right? Either side of that area had been cut religiously for years and years and years. And the one area where it wasn't cut was the area that has the erosion, which now has half of 119 gone. The argument would be made that this would be better for holding hillsides. And there's probably good evidence. If we had areas that had big clay bowls or big clay areas that were sitting on top of something else that were being held in place by those roots, that would be different. But here we have a pile of sand that's being held by roots, and if those roots are gone, something else will grow there. But the sand is at its stackable maximum, right? So if you were to add more sand to the top of the hill, it would end up at the bottom of the hill, but it's not likely that the whole hill is going to move one big chunk unless it's being moved by water.
And that's the issue we generally had on the West Bluff with the washouts has been the water. It's interesting to note though that MDOT won't allow any trimming on the bluff or cutting on the bluff because of bluff stability concerns. And I don't know what reasoning they're using.
Well, but in that argument, they also cut down a boatload of trees right down the street and replace them with things other than trees, right? So like if we're going to look for.
No, I'm just saying, I'm just letting you know that that's MDOT, you know, as a, even though it's not Bluff Drive is not their concern, but M119 is, and they are very strict about it now. They won't let anyone cut.
And I'm not trying to say that this doesn't have a value to it. I mean, like if we're tasked with trying to find ways to increase canopies, and this is certainly counterproductive to that. You know, one of the things that we did talk about is that in looking at some of the other areas, one thing we're finding more and more is that there are areas that are owned by the city that we're not enforcing some of the rules we already have. And it might be better just to say we deal with that. There is a prohibition on disturbing, clearing properties greater than 1 acre in Emmett County, and that's Emmett County zoning already. And so that might be an issue that the county already has precedence on this, and they would be the ones to talk to you and say, well, if we have 200 feet by 200 feet, we essentially exceed that. So that might be a management issue for that. The other thing we talk about is that, like, we've got debris, we've got traffic. I mean, if the city is gonna manage our aesthetics like tall grass, I mean, this could be managed that way, as opposed to saying that this is a erosion issue, which would take a lot of experts talking about this that we may or may not be able to enforce. So.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, I have a question, because you're talking about the root stability because those trunks, I mean, the stumps have been left.
Yeah.
Is there anything preventing the homeowner from taking those stumps out? And would that have an effect on the stability if they did?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes. If we yank the stump out, then there's nothing holding that loose soil together, right? So in general numbers, 80% of most of your erosion is from wind. I mean, the reason that we talk about planting trees and plants, we've been doing this for a long time, is because of the Great Dust Bowl in the 20s. And where fields were plowed and then they were left fallow over the winter, and then they were replanted, and a lot of that stuff was just blown away if there wasn't snow. We hear on television, the radio, whatever media source you want to hear about, where you get huge landslides in California and out west, where they have significantly different soils and they have significantly different rain events than we have. And that's where the trees are holding stuff stacked steeper than they normally would be, and the removal of that tree and the eventual decay of that root system allows the big pieces of soil we call mass wasting, where a big chunk of soil slides down the hill because something was holding it there. The problem you run into here with mass wasting is that 80% of your roots are within the first 12 inches of the soil surface. So these things aren't like poles going all the way down the foot of the bluff. They're holding the top together just like a shrub would be, just like the grass would be. And they're much more likely to fall over in wind than grass would. So biologically, it doesn't fit within that mold. But if we were to tear those stumps out, we'd have bare exposed soil. That's what we really don't want, right? Like that can be moved by wind very easily. And then that would be moved to someplace lower. It would go down the hill. Or if it rains and there's nothing to keep that water from contacting that soil, it picks the soil and moves it to an elevation.
But how long does it take once a tree is damaged like that, removed essentially, and how long does it take for those roots to feel the repercussions of that and die and rot out? And,
Well, and so it's like, that's the
how
thing,
long does that take?
that's the thing, it's hard. Like, what we'll see with probably 60 to 80% of these plants is that they'll regrow, right? So this is
So they'll regenerate in various areas.
yeah, like those
Saplings.
cones will start to shoot, right? So you'll see the, I mean, so like, it's really hard to kind of get your head out of the idea that everything's a mammal, right? Isaac Newton said, we look at the world with our own biases. We look at things as if we're mammals. That root system is going to have stored inertia in carbohydrates and other resources that it's going to use into growing whatever it lost, which was the top, right? It's the other organ that it can grow. And so what will happen is, depending on species, either you'll see lots of things growing up very close by, their genetic clones, or those stumps themselves will grow. And when we see a lot of topping activity, this is essentially the low top. And it's not that it's biologically better, it's that the stated concern that was sent to the city doesn't equal the biological effect that we're looking at. And if you look at the hillside, you can see stumps, but there's all sorts of other things growing there. The rate of decay is going to be determined by species of fungi that are present, species of the host that it's feeding on, and also whether or not it's dead. So the tree has to completely die. Those pieces of wood have to start to decay. And then it has all sorts of other mitigating factors too, like temperature, moisture in the soil, available sunlight. I mean, so it's hard to say. I mean, it could be years, it could be decades. We look at archaeological digs where we have pieces of wood that have been in the ground for centuries. So it's hard to say that this would be significantly changed in a year, but we also know that if this hillside has been treated that way before. And what will happen is they will end up with that same problem, which is there's gonna be a whole bunch of trees in the view very shortly. Right, so like this will continue to regrow and.
Right, so so probably by the time if those roots do not die out in decades, they'll be replaced by other plant material that grows sooner.
Yeah, I mean, and so as I was saying earlier, the problem we run into is that it's the most adaptive organism that's gonna grow there. If we have it open, right, we cut down everything. The best suited organism to grow there is gonna be the most aggressive, fast growing precocious cedar. And so like that's where we'll see things like invasive species that we're
So
concerned.
that was an answer, that was answer to your second question. The first question is, there is nothing stopping that homeowner from removing those stumps. So there's no ordinance that says they can't remove that. The only thing that really is preventing them probably is the cost to remove the stump versus the cost just to cut it off like that is much greater. So it's probably really for them, it's like the owner has achieved the same exact result that she wanted, which was an open view without having to pull out the roots. So, yeah. This is all on Judd Hill, so this is just east of.
Yeah, and from the, I live very close by, and from an aesthetic point of view, it does not look nice.
Yeah.
But
So really, what the question here is, it's about regulating private property through zoning ordinance to achieve the city's goals when it comes to trees. So from the tree board's perspective, I think bluff stability matters to a certain degree, but it's also about what are our goals in the tree board, and we do have goals in the plan that talks about wanting to prevent clear cutting. So I mean, I guess from the tree board perspective, this issue has now come up and raised, and it will go to the planning commission either for discussion or they may decide not to have it. But I think it's an opportunity for us to either talk about this in practice other than just as a goal, and whether or not this is something you want to see going forward, or if you want to see a version of this. And I know Dana has her hand raised as well.
Yeah, I had a few points that I wanted to make. First of all, one was exactly what Victor just said, that this isn't going to be up to tree board. This will be up to council or some other group. And I think really this is more of an issue of erosion control as opposed to trees. And just a quick anecdote, when I was at U of M studying landscape architecture, my job was enforcement for the city of Novi's tree ordinance. And that turned into such a mess where millions of dollars in settlement got passed on to the taxpayers because Novi lost in court. And so I don't know, I feel like this is also an issue for Jim Ramers. Does the city want to get into legislating stuff like that? I did have an idea. What if we had a bluff overlay district where we did have at least start out with some restrictions, like you said, Victor, about removing stumps. Like maybe we don't try and totally control like what gets removed, but just to make sure nobody tries to remove the stumps where there would be a big problem. And maybe again, this is not tree board, this is another group. Let's see, when I was doing research I've done a number of jobs right on Lake Michigan where, we've had very steep bluffs, and so erosion control and what are the best methods. And I don't know if I got this from Tip of the Mid or where I got it from, but the very best plantings that you can do on a bluff are plantings with roots of varying depths, like trees with deeper roots, ground cover, that would be closer at the top, and then shrubs that would be kind of intermediate. One thing I think to note too is that where 119 failed, or where it got washed out, there was no clearing done there. It had a full canopy of trees, and it was still, a disaster. So I guess I don't know what the
Yeah.
whole point
Yeah,
of
let
that
me,
is.
yeah, Dan, I'll respond to those because we brought up some good points. About going to Jim Raymer always goes through any of the ordinances that we pass, but we always go through the government process first. So we usually go through whether or not, the boards want to look into something. And then if it's something that we want to make happen, then we go to legal and see if it can happen. So right now it's just really at a policy discussion level and
Yep,
that's fine. As far as bluff stability, I think that is a good question, is this really a tree issue or is it really a bluff stability issue? And I think for the property owners, based on their letter, I think it's a bluff stability issue. And maybe it requires experts, and maybe this is a council question, what is the best way to manage bluff stability? And we do have one zoning ordinance in place, like I said, to regulate building of structures on the bluff or near the bluff because of excavating the land and et cetera. So there's reasons we do have some precedent regulating what happens on the bluff, even if it's privately owned. And that's one way. So whether or not it's through trees or maybe, vegetation, requirements of what you can plant there, I don't know, that's a separate question. However, we do also have our own general goals in the tree plan, which talk about clear cutting. That could be applied to the bluff, but it could also apply to any property, similar to what Ben said the county has is if you're gonna clear cut 1 acre, you have to go to the county. Is there something like that can happen at the city level, or should it happen at the city level?
so there's no teeth to it right now though, right?
We have no teeth for any tree removal on any private property.
Is there any blight ordinance that would require people to clean up like unmaintained properties?
It's a good, there is, and Jeff, it's Jeff Graham.
I mean, I guess my
There is-
question
there are.
is there something already on the books that prevent this?
I don't think natural material though, like trees and brush and vegetation count. I think it's more the blight that we're talking about is from construction project and you left all your construction material,
So I
construction.
tried to brush pile in my backyard that everybody can see, there's nothing that would.
I have to ask Jeff. I don't think there is, but I can ask Jeff on that. I get where you're going with. Is there something, because people tend to leave when they remove here, they tend to leave everything they cut.
Yeah,
On the
it
block.
stays behind. Although in this instance, I think they took away most of the tree stumps.
I feel like it's an eyesore right now, but if you give it a couple of years, it's all gonna grow in and you're not gonna necessarily see the stumps because other plants are gonna grow around it.
There's good evidence to that.
Yeah, I think when you initially do something, it's gonna look pretty bad,
Yeah,
but eventually.
so some species of tree like oaks, we look for clear cuts. We need those for oaks to regenerate. They're not shade tolerant like other things would be. And so, an oak harvest is horrible looking for 5 years, but then it fills in as a forest.
Well, it's like when we cut the trees by Babe Lopes, like everyone complained, but now nobody notices.
Yeah,
I think this gets back though to what is the reason for having an ordinance? And I think it's erosion, it's not aesthetics, like what looks good to you and I may not look good to somebody else, or they don't care. I think that the only way anything's going to go forward with this has to do with stability of the bluff.
Yeah, so when we pass zoning ordinances, usually the law is your ordinances must be there to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And so
There you
that has actually, it sounds very common sense, but it's actually by the course has been expanded so broad now that, you can almost pass a zoning ordinance on anything. However, you're most legally safe if the solution you provide is narrowly tailored to the problem. So, if bluff stability is a problem, is removing trees the best solution, or is there another better solution? Is preventing the removal of trees a solution, or is it something else? Is it the water, is it preventing water? So probably the issue with the bluff washout at on M119 at Harrison, it was not just that section of bluff hadn't ever been removed, the trees had never been removed, is that we didn't have a curving system on M119 to handle that water down from, State or Harrison to somewhere else. So all that water that was coming from uptown was just going straight there. So I think probably whether or not there was clear cut there or no clear cut, it probably would have still been a water issue there because of all that water coming down. So is there a way to prevent water and wind, or to deal with the water and wind effects that might better achieve this? But from a tree board perspective, we still have this, our tree plan has a lot of different objectives. One is canopy, we are talking about removal, a lot of canopy. We do talk about aesthetics. We do talk about some of these environmental consequences and benefits of either removing or adding trees. So that's a perspective I think the tree board needs to look at it. We're not the experts in bluff stability, but we need to look at it from, do we want to regulate removal of trees on private property is the first question I would say. Is that a recommend? And the second question to that is, to what extent, if you do, if that's a recommendation.
I think it's worth a greater discussion.
Yeah, can't be solving this. Yeah.
Right.
So what I can do maybe for a next discussion is bring some more analyses and other ordinances out there that communities have, and some legal opinions too that you can find in the core systems that can talk about this, because it is, the whole point of the zoning ordinance is to regulate what can happen on private property. But as you keep on reaching down, how many trees, removal of one tree, removal of clear cutting a forest, they're different scales of this. So you can make the argument that clear cutting a whole like 10-acre parcel is bad, but removal of one tree, you might say, that's not going to affect the canopy and the ecosystem as removing a whole forest. So
Clear cutting for views is a lot different than like clear cutting to build or develop.
that's true.
Victor, I think
And-
another thing that would be really helpful is to look at the wording that MDOT has. And that could be kind of a precedent for, if this is how it's happening on West Bluff, maybe this is how it should happen on East Bluff.
Well, what MDOT, I've had a few different correspondence with them, and one recently, I shared that one with Ben, is they basically just said, no cutting, no removal on MDOT right away whatsoever. And that's it.
Oh,
Yeah,
yep,
that's-
so that
They
doesn't
do
really
have a
address.
permitting process for general for moving trees in the right of way, but when it comes to the bluff, and this is a problem that we also see on the West Bluff, because a lot of the residents were used to just being able to go to the city, and the city saying, yes, you can, remove trees, but now MDOT is telling us and to tell them that, sorry, we're not gonna do it anymore. We're not allowing any kind of trimming or removal. So MDOT has a different perspective, and has been duly noted, they did all the trimming there on the city easement that they got, and they planted small little trees. And they claim that was not gonna affect the neighboring properties below the bluff, but they suggest that it's going to, and really what it comes down to is their liability is really what they're making these statements for. But I avoid going down that conversation. I can bring more of this information to you at another future meeting, because it's not just something we can decide on.
Yeah, so just
But
to
it is an issue.
clarify, MDOT does not discuss removing trees on private property on the bluff, only on their right of way.
Only in the right of way, yeah.
Okay,
And they actually sent me an email, it was a couple of years ago, encouraging the city to pass, I think, an ordinance not allowing trimming on private property. I can try to find that ordinance out. Yeah. So, you want on agenda for next time, bring some more information. Okay.
I think it's a good idea.
And I don't know, and maybe between now and then, the planning commission will get this public comment, and I don't know if they'll decide to discuss it further or not at the planning commission at another meeting, but if they're not willing to entertain it at the planning commission, then I don't think there's a need for us to entertain it further, because they're the ultimately ones who pass the zoning ordinance after it goes to council. So if I hear anything from them, then but I'll let the planning commission know that we've heard information about it, and we still think that we need a deeper discussion about it at this level.
Thank you. Any other new business? It's the only thing on the agenda, so.
I just have one thing. So let's see. I think there's going to be an article going in the paper any minute on from Parks. So we're up next. We were talking about putting that right trees, right place in for the tree corner next month. Do we want to do that?
When is Parks doing theirs?
The article's written. I don't know when Rachel's arranged to have it put in.
But
Probably,
it'll be in September.
probably late September.
Okay, so
Yeah.
why don't we do the right tree, right place in October?
Okay. And
And then,
we should
um,
probably have just like a little blurb tying it to last month's article.
Tying
Do you
it
want to
the
do it,
August
Teresa,
article.
or shall I? I don't mind doing it.
Yeah, no, I can do it. It's fine.
Okay. And then I
Oh,
have
you
an
want-
idea for the one after that already. I sent it to Teresa and Victor. And you've all heard of the tiny house movement. Well, there's an article out about the tiny forest movement. And I think that's super interesting.
Okay, yeah, we can discuss it at October's meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Dana.
Mhm.
All right. Any other new business?
Cool. Thanks, Dana. Hope you feel better.